All right, everyone, we'll get started on our next item on the agenda, which is a review of our fire apparatus and Winchester Fire Rescue. So with me to help facilitate this conversation is our Fire Chief, Alan Baldwin, and Tom Shan with Emergency Vehicle Response. And gentlemen, I will turn it over to the two of you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sincerely, Chief Baldwin and I appreciate the opportunity to present our report. And I guess by way of background, before we get into the PowerPoint slides, back in August of 2014, I had moved out into the area. And I live out in Frederick County. I called Chief Baldwin and asked him if I could just come down and chat with him because I've had a sincere interest in the history of the Winchester Fire Rescue and their apparatus. And for a couple hours, we frankly just talked shop. I learned a little bit more about how the department operated and some of the considerations that the chief has to work with on a daily basis. So I offered my services without cost or obligation, and everything you hear from this point, including at some point we'll have received this nice bound 65-page report. This has all been done without cost to the city in any fashion.
And actually, Tom, just to interject, you all do have a copy of that assessment. It is in the agenda materials for today.
At any point during the presentation you had questions, you really don't want to wait till the end. If you have questions on things, please fire off, and either Chief Baldwin or I try to address them. So it kind of understood a little bit about the history of the Winchester Fire Rescue Department and the fact that the volunteer companies throughout history, up to and including current, have done a marvelous job of supplying the apparatus, the medic units or ambulances, transport units, and all the suppression apparatus, including the fire stations. Those are individually owned by those 4 fire companies. Those assets are not owned by the city of Winchester. And as we went through, after the chief and I had kind of thumbnailed some of the scope of services of what we wanted to do, the chief at his own time then got folks together in the individual 4 organizations and really kind of had to candidly secure their permission to allow somebody from the outside to come in, proverbially kick the tires on the apparatus. I spent one entire day or a day and a half at each one of the stations to go around everything, but more importantly to get access to some of their maintenance records and other things that each of those companies kind of do their own thing. So from that August session, the field work was done in November, December, and January 2014 into 15. It took me about the next 4 to 6 weeks to put together a draft. The chief and I then met collectively with the 4 administrative and line officers of the 4 fire companies down at Station 4 in Shawnee one evening for about 2.5 to 3 hours and kind of presented a thumbnail overview of where some of the initial findings of the report and where things were going, and to get their feedback. And to be quite candid, at the end of that session, neither Chief Baldwin or I got a standing ovation at the end of that, because we're really kind of giving them a reflection as to what we thought operationally they were doing, the state of readiness of each of the four companies. And I guess the best analogy that I can come up with is that while Chief Baldwin and his career staff have done a marvelous job in administering the day-to-day operations of Winchester Fire Rescue, it is arguably difficult. It's like we're trying to run a small regional airline, and the city of Winchester funds the pilots and the co-pilots and the flight crew, but when it comes time to try to determine how many planes we have available to get from Winchester to Shenandoah to get out to Dulles, right, and the maintenance of that aircraft is not under Chief Baldwin's purview, right? Chief Baldwin is more than capable with his staff of kind of overviewing and being able to do this, but on any given day at 7 a.m. in the morning, or as it's military types, 0700 hits the bell, the chief and his staff don't have any operational control over what they're riding on that day. So that's kind of a significant thing that we want to focus in on. So go back to March of 2015. Draft report gets put out. Chief and I then met several times with city manager, kind of looked and assessed some things, revised a couple, and the final document got put out in June of 2015. And the document you have in front of you has got several things in bold throughout that indicate some updates of what's happened since then. So initially, this was the objectives after discussing with Chief Baldwin and his staff and the volunteer corporations buy-in, kind of an overall fleet replacement program, because candidly what's happened in the past, as you'll see, each station bought a piece of apparatus or a medic unit when they felt that they needed one, had the financial resources to do it, or maybe the unit had just gotten so old that they decided it was now, from their perspective, time to replace the vehicle. We individually, on each of the suppression apparatus and the medic units, assess that for its age, mechanical condition, and an estimate of how many more years of service life it could serve the needs of the community in the city of Winchester. Reviewed the maintenance and certification and testing programs, and then at the end made some overall recommendations. I realize you folks don't know me. Chief Baldwin and I have developed a pretty good working relationship for those folks. I have written for some national publications on apparatus fleets for the better part of the last 20 years. I spent 28 years in the apparatus industry. I won't bore you with the details. On page 66 of the report is my background. But I work on a daily basis supporting Navy Fire and Emergency Services, managing their fleet of over 700 vehicles with an annual procurement budget of $14 million. So I was hoping that I could take a small part of that slice of expertise, and again, without obligation to the city of Winchester, be able to help them. So a little bit about the apparatus history. How did we get here? And again, the situation, as you will see, there's some things that we need to address. This didn't happen overnight, ladies and gentlemen, right? The volunteer fire companies have done an incredibly great job to supply needed apparatus and equipment that's on the vehicles to meet the needs of the city of Winchester. But as you'll see, we're at the point where, because of a whole bunch of reasons, that's not a viable process moving forward. If we go back to the late 1980s, at one point the city operated with 5 fire companies and engines, something that had pumping capabilities and had hose that could actually extinguish a fire. Those 5 companies operated 11 engines back in the day. Today in the city of Winchester we have 6 of those, and not all 6 are operational. One has been out of service for over 3 years. One, unfortunately, as you're probably aware, was involved in an accident and is now being assessed to see if it can be fixed and at what cost. So today, as we're down here in this community, up north where you live, there's 4 units to serve the entire community. We need a minimum of 3 to be on the road every day. When each of the stations that operate engines had 2, their internal process was they switched over. They ran one for 2 weeks. On the 15th of the month, you would see the newer or older unit would be operating, which then gave them the balance of that time to operate, clean, and maintain the secondary unit. That hasn't been the case recently. Between 1967 and 2002, the average frontline age of the engines were 17 years old, so that's kind of key. And between 69 to 98, the average frontline service for the ladder trucks, of which there's 2. And the Raps Fire Company, the folks that operate the green units, they have operated 2 ladder trucks at that station since 1978. And to their credit, they are the only one of the 4 stations that, because at times the aerial apparatus by its very nature is more expensive to buy than a pumper, and a pumper is more expensive than a medic unit as you go up the scale of cost. The Rouse Fire Company, at their own cost, on 4 different occasions dating back to the 60s, purchased a used apparatus because they couldn't afford a new one, rehabilitated it or repurposed it, the current buzzword, to make it meet their local needs, and at their expense put that in service, including most recently within the last several weeks. They purchased a used unit from Fairfax County, Virginia, and they're in the process of outfitting that as a squad, which was one of the recommendations that was made in the report. So on average, each of the fire companies, the 4 ones, if you take a look at everything they bought a new fire truck every 9 years. You say, Tom, why is that important? It's important because most fire departments, in general, years ago, would say, if you went into any fire department anywhere in the United States, it could be anywhere in Northern Virginia, with the exception probably Fairfax, which turns their fleet over more frequently, you'd say, how long are you keeping a fire truck? They'd say 20 years. So if you think of it as a consumer, how many products do we use? You know, how many of us are running around in a 20-year-old car or keeping a 20-year-old computer? But fire trucks, historically, we wanted to make them last 20 years. Maybe we didn't use them every day for 20 years, but we wanted to make them last that long. So in the past, the 4 companies in Winchester, they purchased a major unit every 9 years, which if you only operated 2, it automatically meant We're keeping it 18 years, and it gets replaced at that 18-year mark, and that kind of worked out well back in the day, as you'll see shortly, based on the number of incidents that they have. Well, here's where we are today. All right, and again, this is based on the assumption, again, that there's 6 engine companies, and one of those at the South End company has been out of service now for almost 3 years with no apparent progress made to get that unit operational. So everything, the 6 units average 15 years. The 3 oldest units, which are a 97, a 96, and a 2002 for Wagon 1, Wagon 4, and Engine 5, the units out of Friendship, Shawnee, and the South End stations. Those units, the average age of those is 18 years, and most critically, the average age of Truck 2 and Ladder 2 at the Rouse Company, their average age is 22, with Truck 2 being a 1998 unit, and Ladder 2, which is currently out of service, having some maintenance work done. It's a 1992 unit. Rouse Fire Company purchased that used in 2002, had it rehabbed, and that replaced the 1992 unit that they had purchased from Fairfax County. So the Rouse Company, because they operate the 2 more expensive units, have pretty much historically had 1 unit that they bought new and something they bought used, and then repurposed to make it meet their needs. So here are the current fleet statistics. Friendship, Company 1, operates 4 units. This includes the suppression units and the medic units. 19-year span. Rouse, 6-year span. Shawnee, 19, and South End, 13. That's historically where we are now. So the units that, when you look at the 19-year span for both of those, the other critical thing is that since 2010, was the last time that a new suppression unit has been purchased by any one of the companies. And while numerous times that Chief Baldwin and I have met with the folks and they say, oh, we have plans to buy a new unit, it's like saying, I have plans, to do something to buy a 5th guitar that my wife doesn't know about, so please don't let her know that, all right, because she's shopping right now as we speak, all right? It's okay to have a plan, but it has to be a plan backed up with some financial resources that we can actually put it and make it go to work. This chart seems a little busy. There's a little bit easier version to read in the report. But most significantly, if you look at it from the year 2000, citywide, Chief Baldwin's department responded to 4,686 incidents. In 2015, a total of 6,092. In conversation with Chief Baldwin just prior, we're obviously, by the time we wrap up the year, Chief, it was what, 6,500? 6,500 incidents that the city's fire rescue department is going to operate. Now, what that means, we have initially an aging fleet with not initially any viable plans to replace it. A somewhat dramatic increase, particularly at the Friendship Company, if we go from 2010 to 2015, and similarly down at Station 5 at South End. Station 5, it's one of the things that the fire service, we're kind of a little bit demented in that we'd like to tote the total number of runs. So while we don't want people's property to burn down, if you're in a busier station, and I got my start many years ago in College Park, Maryland, you would tout with respect to your neighboring stations, who's busier, all right? It was just like saying, I've got a better on-base percentage, I've got a better ERA, or a lower ERA. So the percentage of increase of incidents between 2010 to 2015 at Station 1, that's a 91% increase. Station 5, the busiest station in the city and the one that is most problematic with respect to their current fleet of what they're trying to put on the street, that represents a 73% increase in incidents. It's no different than if we use anything else greater in our consumer life. We have higher incidents of runs, no viable plan really to replace the units, and our fleet is aging. So we're kind of lining up that we have some concerns here. To help bring this home a little bit, average vehicle mileage. The report tended to be fact-based, and in many cases, as we'll see shortly, the amount and quality of information that was available for each of the 4 fire companies varied widely. Any statistic that I asked Chief Baldwin to supply, even if I was working from home, I had it back from his office in 15 or 20 minutes, and able to try to digest and access some of the information from the individual 4 fire companies. While they were all very cooperative, the level and the amount of information and the quality of that information was somewhat difficult to assess. The average vehicle mileage for the period that we were trying to study at the time, 2010 to 2014, since that's where we were working, and that's why the report fell over from 14 into 15. If we took the entire 6 units, units were averaging about 5,600 miles a year. Doesn't sound like a lot, because on a fire truck, you'd expect this thing to run a long time. The 3 newer units, and this is the 7th that shows you as we increased the runs, the newer units, which are in service more than the older units, just from a reliability standpoint, that same time period, those same units were running 6,100 miles per year. The difference between truck 2 and ladder 2 seems to be rather dramatic. The ladder 2 is a much larger vehicle, and the Rouse Fire Company, on a response of an EMS call, in their district was using truck 2 rather than ladder 2 because it's a smaller unit, a little bit more economical to operate. So that's why the mileage difference there. So we tried to take that and extrapolate it, and all I did is add 4% to these numbers and try to say and extrapolate and say, for the sake of argument, because there are some jurisdictions in Northern Virginia that operate their fleets, that replace their fleets, entire fleets, cut them in half, but they replace their entire fleet every 7 to 8 years. They do that for a whole bunch of different reasons. So we tried to say, we've got an aging fleet, the mileage and the number of incidents are going up. Well, if we estimated based on that and added a couple percent, at the end of 12 years, an engine would have 80,000 miles on it. And if we decided to push it out and say, you know, I don't think we can get 20 years out of it, it's pretty obvious based on, even though, again, individual volunteer fire companies bought very high quality. They didn't buy cheap apparatus, inexpensive apparatus. They bought high quality apparatus initially, and that's the only reason it got us candidly to where we are. There's not too many, you're not going to find too many locations anywhere in the Northern Virginia area. Somebody's running around in a 1996 wagon on a daily basis. So if we push that out to 15 years, now we have 100,000 miles. Why is that important? Well, some of the feedback that Chief Baldwin and I got from the volunteer chiefs saying, the reason we're configuring the vehicles we want is because we're trying to up the resale value. At the end of the point where we determine we're going to replace it, if we buy it like we put A and B together, then we're going to get more money from it. And that's true to a point. But there's not, the used fire truck market, there's not a lot of people looking to buy a 15-year-old fire truck with 100,000 miles on it. At that point, you're looking at it, people are buying it for sentimental value or scrap value. So the repair and maintenance costs, because the stations are responsible for maintaining their own rigs. And there's initially nothing wrong with that. From a home rule standpoint, that sounds just fine, all right? But in most jurisdictions, whether you're in Loudoun County or Prince William County or the county I'm very familiar with in Prince George's County, Maryland, if a volunteer fire company buys a piece of apparatus with their own funds with no taxpayer support whatsoever, several things happen. Number one, in order to go be insured by the county, it has to meet certain minimum standards so that even though the engine at Friendship is painted black over orange and the one at Station 5 is painted black over red, it's okay that they look different, but they have to meet certain minimum standards from a component standpoint. Most importantly, from a safety perspective, when Chief Baldwin's folks go to operate it, it kind of operates the same. You don't have to run around the rig 3 times to find out where something is. And while Chief Baldwin has done a phenomenal job with his crew to be able to attempt to get standardization, as far as they've gotten, ladies and gentlemen, is the hose loads, because the vehicles are so dramatically different. And while it's nice that each company has their own individual, nuances on the vehicle, it makes it a little bit difficult when you're trying to have a career firefighter that's assigned to Station 1 today, and the next time he or she comes in on duty on overtime, they're working at Station 4, and everything is in a different place. So it's tough to get standardization. It's like trying to go through a floor plan of 4 different houses if you didn't know where the bedroom was. So the individual companies are responsible for the maintenance, and that again becomes a little bit problematic because everybody's got a different approach as to how they want to do it. I was initially hoping during this to be able to take every vehicle in the fleet and develop one barometer was an operational cost per mile. All right? When you're evaluating fleets, there's a whole bunch of different economic drivers and things that you can look at. But because of the inconsistency of the information that I received from the companies, this was the best that I could come up with. And this is somewhat dramatic. Here's the Friendship station. Here is the 2010 unit. Here is the 1997 unit. So Chief Luttrell up at Friendship, this particular unit, which you will see come up in other numerous times, that basically has become the ad hoc unit that is available to the other two companies if they have a situation where there is no fire truck, and that happened just last week. Down at Station 4, Wagon 4 developed an issue, had to go out of service now. We have people there and no fire truck. Chief Luttrell was nice enough to loan for their, what's it, Chief? Day, 2 days? 2 days. 2 days, right? To loan company for Wagon 1 to run it, and that's great, but from 2010 to 2014, that's the high price spread of what it's costing the Friendship Fire Company to keep that rig on the road. So there's a 97 price compared to a 2010 price. Here is the cost to run the single axle, the 1998 unit. When ladder 2 goes out the door, that's the cash queen in the city of Winchester. That costs a lot of money to put that rig on the road, yet that is the only unit, right, that has an aerial device that's capable of reaching virtually every structure that's in your city. The day the truck 2 is running out, that's a 75-foot unit. That reaches maybe 50% of the buildings that you have in your district. And those new 3-story wood frame apartments that they're building at the corner of Jubal Early and Valley Road, truck 2, if they run that pole down there, Chief already knows. In addition to the fact it doesn't carry the adequate complement of ground ladders, that's not going to reach the roof or the 3rd floor of a lot of those buildings based on a setback. So these are operational costs that the fire companies, this is kind of like the behind-the-scenes stuff. They didn't know this. We kind of drilled down to that level, and that was one of the things. We're not trying to slam anybody, but the costs, they are what they are. So here's our overall concerns, right? We have an aging fleet, like myself. I'm not getting any younger, right? 19-year-old Wagon 1 and 20-year-old Wagon 4. When we presented this report with both Chief Walden and myself, and then a couple weeks later, Eden came and we met with everybody once again at Station 4. I mean, nobody liked that information, and Company 4 said, well, you know, we're planning in maybe a couple of years of rehabilitating Wagon 4, which is a nice rig, but it's already 20 years old. If you wait 2 more years, it's 22 years old. At that point, it's got sentimental value. The ladder truck age at 18 and 24, again, we can't change the facts. They are what they are. From an operational perspective, the department had not done this. Chief Baldwin, again, excellent cooperation. We got every vehicle in the fleet weighed. One of the few things that's really important in life from a liability standpoint, the NFPA standard 1911 requires every fire department to weigh every vehicle every year to make sure that it's not overweight. And the parallel is when I go down to see my doctor down on Amherst Street, even if I've got a sniffle, the first thing the nurse does, and I know what's coming and I hate it, she says, okay, you can leave your shoes on, let's weigh you. Hey, you're not, you haven't lost any weight. I already know that, all right? I already know I'm overweight, that's why I'm trying to go to the wellness center 3 times a week. Well, fire trucks are the same way as us. We don't get slimmer as we get older. So because of the design of truck 2, and this is a liability standpoint, and it hasn't changed yet today, although it might with the introduction of the squad. The unit was built with an 18,740 pound front axle. It has seating for 8. You probably never put 8 people on it. But the day you put more than 3 personnel in the cab, it's now legally overweight on the front axle. That's pretty serious. Fortunately, you only have 1 in the fleet. Most people have a number of units in the fleet that are overweight. And that's been like that since the day it was built, right? Because somebody didn't know what they were doing putting the specs together. More importantly, from a safety aspect, not liability, because this doesn't make, it's not important until it happens. And Chief Baldwin and I and the staff have had extensive discussions on this, right? In the entire city of Winchester, right, beyond the aerial devices, which are hydraulically powered, one at 75 feet and one at 110 feet, there's only one 35-foot ladder that enabled you to get to the 3rd story of a building anywhere in Old Town and any one of the other side streets. And again, I'll go go back to to that apartment complex on Jubal Early. The day that one of those things, once they get occupied and get rocking, right? If ladder 2 is not in service and shows up with that 135-foot ladder, we're not talking necessarily, folks, about rescuing civilians. That might happen. I've been in the fire service for 40 years. I've only rescued one person over a ground ladder in 40 years of doing this. This is for Chief Baldwin and his folks when they get jammed up. Instead of bailing out and using your rescue rope out of the 3rd story, it'd be a heck of a lot nicer to have a ladder there. And since you have multiple 3-story buildings in the city of Winchester, and they've been there forever, and others that are getting built, it's only 135-foot ladder. How'd that happen? Because the Rouse Fire Company is responsible for supplying the ladder trucks. Chief Baldwin knew that this was the situation, but he can't change it because he's not in charge of buying fire trucks or trying to outfit the trucks. From a preventative maintenance standpoint, inconsistent, all right? To be quite candid, 2 of the stations did a phenomenal job. They spent a lot of their funds to maintain the apparatus, and the records were very, very good. In one case, I got a 3-ring binder by year for every vehicle with every invoice. I had to add them up and read the invoice and figure out what work was done. In another case, I got part of a banker's box with a couple of years worth of stuff, and it was pretty obvious that it didn't encompass everything. So the bottom line is every fire company, kind of from a record-keeping standpoint, they do what they think is reasonable and rational, which from a fleet perspective really doesn't pass muster, right? Lack of a quality assurance program. When they bring the unit back from a vendor, there's nobody within a fire company. Back in the day when I started, it was pretty common. Fire departments would have, the banker, the barber, there'd be somebody that worked at a local garage, and he knew all things about vehicles. Like our cars, fire trucks are heavily dependent upon electronics. So when one of the fire companies gets an invoice and says, well, here's what got fixed for $7,200. Here's how do we know that we got $7,200 worth of work, right? It's not administered by the Chief and I have had several conversations with the excellent staff that you have down at the city yard. The people down there understand the issue, and they openly admit it. We love to work on fire trucks, but we have neither the time nor EVT certified folks, and we don't have the facilities that we can take one of your rigs and put it up on a lift. So we're very much right now entirely dependent upon the individual companies in politely do the right thing to follow the standards. Some folks do, and some folks, I guess the expression is that they maintain the vehicle as best as their means will allow. But that doesn't pass muster when we're paying folks to be riding on these vehicles and can't validate the safety operational characteristics. And that brings us to the last bullet point, right? When we had 6 vehicles and people were able to maintain them, maybe we were politely denying what was going on, but it kind of worked out. Because if one was out of service and it became the 16th of the month, we sent it out and got it fixed. For the last 3 years, we've been running with just 5 vehicles, and now with the accident on engine 4, we're down to 4. And if something happens to one more vehicle, I hate to use the term reserve or spare, because that connotates bad things. In most career fire departments, even in Arlington County and the larger jurisdictions, a spare or a reserve unit kind of meant that it was in the back line and it was in the bullpen, and we rarely had to use it. Because these vehicles are so complex and need a lot of routine maintenance, spare and reserve units, they're in service every day of the week. It's running at a different station. If you've ever driven across Route 7 to head into the city for any reason, you've seen a Loudoun County unit or a Fairfax County unit, you'll notice that anymore they don't have big numbers on the side. They've got these little plates that slide in. Today it's running at engine 435, today it's running at 440, and it's because things are shuffling all the time. It's like your daily lineup card. And that arguably, when you're down to just now 4 vehicles, together with the aerial issues, it becomes extremely problematic. So to go for a minute to the medic units, right? Friendship Fire Company, during that period, 2011 to 2014, right, 18% increase in the runs on your medic unit, on your ambulance fleet. Shawnee Fire Company had a much lower percentage, and South End went up. Again, that relates to, while the medic unit situation, at the time that I did the survey, it was somewhat problematic at best, because 2 of the units had over 100,000 miles, and at Station 5 while their newest unit was 2007 by all accounts. Chief, how would you want to describe that? They told me some things that weren't too polite.
Mechanically, it's a lemon. And it's a service nightmare to keep it in service. It's out of service more than it's in service. The mechanical issues, chassis design, motor issues, those type of things.
So fortunately, and Chief Baldwin and I and his staff, we had several discussions about this. The medic unit situation is temporarily the ship has been righting in that the three companies have all placed into service new medic units because they applied for Virginia Rescue Squad grants. In the case of Station 5, they got what they call a hardship grant, and that grant paid for 100% of the cost of that medic unit. The other two stations were able to place new medic units in service by getting grants. So that was a good thing. But then from an operational standpoint, when somebody's sitting across the table from me and says, Tom and Chief, yeah, we have plans to replace Wagon 4, well, I have to be in all candor. If you couldn't afford to buy a new ambulance at approximately $200,000, I'm guessing there's not $500,000 to $600,000 sitting in your bank account to replace a 1996 unit. So it's great that they got the grant program to be able to do that. But as far as the future replacement for medic units and certainly for fire apparatus, it's nice that occasionally people give out grants, AFG grants for fire apparatus. You can't plan your emergency services based on grants and passing the hat one more time and hope that people are going to make this go. So a brief review, and again, everything that you see here, these are resources that are owned and operated, operated by Winchester Fire Rescue, but these assets are owned by the individual fire companies. Wagon 1 here is 2010. This is the newest unit in the city of Winchester. It was delivered just a couple of weeks ago. The 2016 Ford Horton medic unit. This is Wagon 1. You'll see that while that's normally stationed at the Friendship Station. Again, because of the beneficence of Chief Luttrell, you'll see that running out of other stations as they get in trouble. The support units, and then the older ambulance that was a 2010. And again, the medic units are much like the engine apparatus. They're on the street all the time, so there was a segment of the report that addressed future purchases of what type of time span that they need to be turned over. Truck 2 over on the side is the 75-foot unit. That unit was purchased new by the Rouse Fire Company, so in terms of a new fire unit, that's the last time they bought anything new. This unit was 1992, they acquired in 2004. It came from Elmont, Long Island, New York. All right, and that was modified, repainted to meet their needs. That's their serve unit, and this is the unit that they just acquired. Was a 2001. That came from Fairfax County. That was Fairfax County lingo was called an air light unit. So it had a breathing air system on it and a light tower. And folks at Rouse, from conversations with Chief Baldwin, are doing an excellent job outfitting that for the squad. Chief, you want to address this for units, how they plan to operate that and how that's going to take a little bit of load off the ladder trucks?
In the city of Winchester, we don't have a specific rescue vehicle or a squad for vehicle extrication. All the extrication equipment is carried on ladder 2 or truck 2. Truck 2 is the primary, being the newer and smaller vehicle extrication. Station 2's goal was to try to take some of the load off the aerial apparatus, removing the extrication equipment from ladder 2, placing that on the air light unit, and redesignating that, reconfiguring that to squad vehicle. We try to take some of the pressure off the older ladder truck, which is currently out of service or repairs. We've maintained a 75-foot and 100-foot because of some of the buildings, the hospital, some of the college campus buildings, some of the buildings downtown because of the setbacks and the height. 100 foot's required as opposed to the 75. Currently, we're relying on Stevens City and Greenwood because they have a 100-foot plus tower and ladder at their stations, mutual aid or something's needed at those facilities. So, but their plan is to again convert that into a squad unit, which they used to have years ago, and kind of put everything on the ladder trucks. Now to go back to try to keep the mileage down as operational costs. And again, that's one of the things that was pointed out in the study.
The hope is that, the indication is that they'll be able to remove some of the heavy cascade equipment off this unit, relocate it down to the squad, which way they partially solve the overweight issue on the front axle. Right down at Company 4, Wagon 4, the C grade unit, again, it's oldest unit in the fleet, 1996, and again, has given yeoman service to the community. The newest engine that Shawnee has is a 2006 model. There are 2 medic units, one purchased in 2009 and the other one in 2015. South End, part of the reason why they are in the significant dilemma that they have was that because of prior purchases of what they bought, and I suspect no different than the fire chiefs, both in that station and at the career side at the time, they pretty much, they did what they want, not to demean them. But between 2001 and 2009, with the exception of this unit and the older medic unit, they replaced 2 pumpers and 2 medic units in that 6-year period. All right, so from a financial standpoint, maybe they had the wherewithal to do that. But at any time you're buying fire trucks, it's not complicated. Even if you wanted the units to last 50, your engines and wagons to last 15 years, you'd say, well, ideally, I want to buy one about every 7 to 7.5 years. I'll space them out. When the oldest one gets to be 15, I'm going to have the financial resources. It's going to be getting to the point where it's going to be kind of eating me out of house and home, and I'm going to replace it. So because of some purchasing decisions that they had made earlier, when times were good, they went out and bought wagon engine 5, the 2002. That's the unit that's been out of service since 2014. Back, it was September of this year, came back into the city. The chief and I, because it was out of service at a vendor's location, in early 2015, the chief and I spent the day, and we drove out to that vendor's location. They were gracious enough to bring the unit inside and allow us access to it, and we spent 3 or 4 hours assessing that. I probably do want to say, for every one of these units, if you're interested, there's a portion of the report, there's 3 to 4 or 5 pages on every one of these vehicles in terms of its condition and very specifics in terms of operational readiness of what needed to be done to be taken care of. Wagon 5 is a 2008, which, again, it's the busiest engine in the city, and there is no backup. So when it does come to time that operationally it needs work, we have to hope that Chief Luttrell up at Friendship has both of his units in service and can agree to, basically, it's a gentleman's agreement, right? I'm going to loan it to you for a couple of days, please don't wreck it, and bring it back to me. Station 5's medic units is 2007, which is the unit which is problematic that they're trying to replace now, and then unit in 2014. So that's kind of the roundup. Again, it's only because the stations bought good quality apparatus. If they had bought low bid, inexpensive stuff, we wouldn't have gotten 15, 16, 20, or 24 years out of it. There's extensive photographic documentation under each section of each rig, but not to bore you, but just this was the unit that's out of service because of things that I found when we're going underneath. They had initially gotten an estimate from a vendor to, quote, put it back on the street. I'm not sure what that means, for about $40,000 or $45,000. And my humble estimation was, even back then, it was probably going to be closer to 75 or 80. The fact that it has not been used operationally the last 3 years, and other things that would need to be upgraded, candidly, to put that thing in service, you'd probably need close to $100,000. And at that point, I'd have to say, if somebody were to ask me, Doc, what's your opinion? It's a sanity check. I don't know that I put $100,000 into something that was built in 2002. At that point, you've exceeded the residual value of the unit. On truck 2, the things we took, again, career guys could not have been nicer. This was not as cold a day as it is here today, and we're out with ski caps and stretched out up in a parking lot and found these couple of things which they were partially unaware of, but again, we're relying upon the volunteer fire companies to do the maintenance of this. So to cut to the chase, there's extensive documentation in the back of the report about fleet replacement, but from the ideal perspective, if you were looking at wagons and engines should be replaced at about the 12-year mark, and you're going to be somewhere between 80 to 82,000 road miles on it. If you're interested in trying to recoup and get some of the residual value back out of the unit and have it either traded back in, not that I'm advocating to do this, but for example, for the better part of the last 10 years, Arlington County, Virginia has a program where they lease their fire trucks. So they have gotten out of the business where the county physically owns the fire apparatus. They make arrangements with the vendor that they're going to buy it from, and over that course of period, they purchase from 2 different manufacturers. So you're not locked in. It's like if you have a lease with somebody, it just keeps rolling over, and if you have a bad customer or service relationship, you have to keep going back to that same person. But I'm very good friends with fire deputy chief there that manages the fleet, and what they do, they determine that they operated at the 7-year mark because of mileage and the residual value. An outside contractor, not the people who built the fire truck, they guarantee a residual value, what that vehicle is going to be worth at the 7-year mark, and they buy it back at that point, and then that partially funds the replacement for the unit. There are other people that say, well, yes, sir.
Do you have calculated cost per mile to run these things? I mean, it would seem to me that that would be just, what is it? I mean, at some point, that's what you're going to ask, is cost per mile.
There is a cost per mile, and it varies depending upon what is actually on that apparatus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, we'll get to it, I guess, but that was just...
But give the 2 sides of it. Arlene County, it works very well because geographically, right? It's 10 stations, very compact community, so to a point they're kind of controlling the mileage, and they now have a very good track record in history. They're on their 3rd round of doing that. Prince George's County, Maryland, 2 years ago, entered a lease agreement with the same manufacturer that Arlene County is buying from, and said, well, we're going to do this for 8 years because we don't want to spread it out over 7. Well, the mileage agreement that they agreed to, right, because of the distances involved, they're going to blow through that mileage thing in probably year 3. So at the end of that 8th year, the residual value that somebody in the county administration thinks that engine 842 is going to be worth, it's not going to be worth that. So I mean, in Winchester, to me, if we drill down into more numbers, it could be very predictable because to a point we can kind of control this. We're not talking about 20, 25-mile-an-hour runs. We're running a paramedic engine, halfway up through the county up on 495.
That's it. When you get into the cost per mile issue, you get into the automatic gate issue also. Our guys in the city are responding to calls in the county, which I guarantee you they're driving a lot farther to go to those calls than they would in our small 9-square-mile area. Very recently, we had an issue with council consenting to cover the cost of fuel, and so the issue is how much of that fuel is being spent in our 9-square-mile jurisdiction.
But all that goes back to the fact that we don't own the apparatus.
Right, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, there is a balance of trade issue, but again, even in Arlene County is auto-aided. They're running, other than going into the District of Columbia, they're on a routine daily basis. They're going in the Fairfax, Alexandria, and so forth. So it's one of those things you have to evaluate. And hopefully you look at it, one hand pretty much washes the other, right? Ladder trucks, again, this could be debated, but at the 15-year mark, and again, this potentially could change with the acquisition of the squad and how the chiefs decide to deploy that at routes. That could take some of the load off the ladder trucks. So this had to be updated because what we had hoped that based on when this first came out, that we would have frankly moved a little bit further ahead with the consent of the volunteer companies and their look at. The report recommended that in the city of Winchester, and this dovetails with the Insurance Services Office, the ISO requirements, that ultimately the recommended fleet level for the city should be 5 engines, 2 ladders, and 6 medic units. The report was also written at the time because the status of Engine 5 was, put it candidly, problematic at best, and still appears to be that it was a reasonable way for South End Fire Company to look at and say, rather than try to absorb the cost of fixing or replacing or getting that second pumper back in their station, which even if they had a viable way to do that, in all candor, based on the quality of their maintenance program and their records, probably would have put themselves further in the hole. They didn't have the necessary funds to maintain 4 vehicles in their station. They barely had enough assets to do 3. So the thought was that would be able to offload that unit, and then we could get into a reasonable fleet replacement program. So the goal right now would be, whether it's 2017 or as soon as possible, in 2017 to replace Truck 2 and Ladder 2. Chief, would you maybe just to chime in and, with respect to Rouse's consent of where they are with respect to their ownership of their units?
Right now, Station 2, the conversations we've had with the Chief Clark, and the President, Vernon Clark, 2 is asking for our assistance. They're basically ready to turn the titles over to the city because the condition of the apparatus and looking at what has to be done, the cost of replacing it. Both those pieces, they need to both replace it. And quite candidly, the chief's approached myself, the city manager, basically saying, let us know when you want the titles. I hate to put it that way, but that's about it.
What was that, sorry?
When do you want the titles to the rigs? Yeah, use them if, as trade-ins or whatever. They're,
The idea that,
Two stations are ready to do it?
Station 2.
so
There's 2,
Rouse.
both live.
Got it.
So what happened with these conversations? We've been thinking this out for the better part of the last year, trying to come up with something that preserves our ISO rating, which is critical for economic development and commercial, to keep our insurance rates as low as possible, and preserve our less than 4-minute response time. And so the idea was, if any of these companies are willing to partner with us, and we move forward this way, and council is interested in it, to get the price down, we would need to have that old apparatus to be able to trade it in, like you do with a car. You trade it in towards either the lease purchase or the lease for the long haul. And Rouse is the one who, at this point, has expressed a desire to want to do that with us.
No one else has?
Alan?
No, it's been a mixed, excuse me, I was looking up some statistics for you also.
Okay.
Right there.
Okay.
It's interesting. The chiefs had asked to meet with the city manager and I last year about this time, actually, I believe, correct? Stan, we had a meeting about.
Thereabouts.
There's a lot of pride involved. I think the companies are all, 2 of the engine companies are considering it, but again, it's a lot of tradition and pride is involved there. I know Station 4, the president, Carlicki, and Chief Hess had approached me about 2 weeks ago that they were going to revisit this concept with their board.
Station 4 is which one?
Shawnee, I'm sorry, Shawnee.
Which is where the truck that
Was
recently
involved
was
in-
involved in the
Their
accident.
engine 4 was involved in the accident, was from that station.
And it might be total?
We don't know yet.
And see,
I didn't hear about this.
That's a real issue from a number of different perspectives, and we've talked about that. We've got city employees operating vehicles that we don't own or maintain in emergency situations with other personnel, volunteer personnel, on that vehicle as well. And so when you're looking at the exposure issues, the potential issues with people on board getting hurt that are not employees of the city people responding to a call on vehicles they have no control over the maintenance of, it's very problematic. So, hearing Mr. Shand's explanation of how Arlington County's doing it, perhaps a lease or something where the city can gain control over how those vehicles are maintained is nice to hear and possibly a good thing to explore further.
We kind of go back to the original question too of what we're hearing from other companies. We also met with Friendship. And the general response from Friendship was, we're not ready right now, but in the future. President Mr. Jenkins, who's the treasurer of Friendship, Chief Luttrell, we met with some of their members, and they felt they weren't ready today, but that's not to say what the future's going to hold. In South End, they were considering this, but we had a meeting with the chiefs and the presidents the other night, to be quite candid. They have a new chief, and they're interested in looking to try to purchase a new pumper with some type of AOG brand.
And this is something that localities across the country are dealing with, where you've got a combination system, meaning you've got career staff operating and working out of a volunteer-owned facility and operating volunteer apparatus. Unfortunately, volunteerism, period, is not as strong as it used to be. And especially as people age, they don't necessarily want to volunteer to fight fires anymore. And we are struggling with how we continue to provide the fire protection that we have to provide while being fiscally responsible with it.
So if we had folks who want to participate and we want to participate, obviously there's lots of benefits to doing that. Is there a mechanism to having it? I think Mr. Shand, you mentioned a minimum standard that you'd have to follow. Is that something that we could enforce?
We had talked about this part of this whole program. We've actually started this somewhat already today with was standardizing hose loads. Up until 2013, the hose loads on the engine companies in the city, there was no standardization. So right now, today, they are standardized as best as possible because each of the apparatus has a different hose bed layout. But we are as close as we're probably ever going to get, and we're doing some other things to move towards standardization of the existing fleet. Ultimately, with any fleet replacement program, we've even talked about this with the medic units. We have a committee we're getting together now to standardize the medic unit design, so the compartments are all the same, the equipment's in the same areas. That would be one of the goals of this program. So it doesn't matter what station you're at, you show up on a fire ground in the city of Winchester and go to the driver's side, right, or driver's side rear compartment, it's the same setup no matter what apparatus you're on. Ladder trucks obviously will be different from the engines, but on the engines, everything's in the same place, the ladder, the same situation.
The medic units, when we floated that, is probably less of a contentious issue with respect to the configuration. The standardization is some people right away just means, oh, my rigs aren't going to be white over orange anymore. So, all right, stop. That's not what we're talking about. But the general configuration, at least for the engine companies, they were still like, well, we'd like to set it up the way we want, which means, to a point, our money, and just even on a couple, I'm thinking of the water tank, all right, where we said, have the water tank configuration like this, and said, no, I want more water because of, you're not going to want to hear this, runs out in the county and it's going to improve my residual value when I trade it in. Well, if the rig's 20 years old, it's a beater. You know, we don't care whether it has 500, 750, or 1,000 gallons of water. That didn't help. But again, I understand it goes back to the tradition, and it's so hard to break. Although in Prince William County, where the county funds the apparatus, there are minimums. There is a defined body and equipment layout that while your units in OWL and Woodbridge are painted bright yellow, and the units in Dale City are forest green over white, and the name on the front might be different, everything is identical and it's in the same place on everything no matter what the number is on the side. That's, to a point, kind of what we were driving to, and understandably there was no standing applause on that. Chief and operationally, everybody in the staff was on board. It certainly would make the training and the operational safety and effectiveness of the career staff improve greatly if we were able to even, break through that. And that was one of the goals.
Well, I mean, so we help fund the fuel, we do other things. Is there not some mechanism that we can say, guys, we just have to do this? I know it's breaking lots of long-term, obviously I heard other things you said, but at some point, we see where the path's going, and we're going to work with them, obviously, but is there not a mechanism that we can have to help facilitate this participation?
I think
Both carrots and sticks.
I think we started with the fuel, we started with some other things. I think too, maintaining the combination system is important to the city. It's still the best deal for the city. It's been over the years. It's the best for the city, for the citizens. Again, because look at what they provide now, apparatus-wise, but even facilities-wise, in other services. And it's important for us to keep that balance. And I think some of it is we start to try to help these guys and reassure them that, listen, we're trying to make sure people are here. At no time do we want to go away from this combination system, but it is still the best deal, but let them focus on other areas, the facilities, the support vehicles, those type of things, and let us take care of those items to make sure and take that burden off. I had a conversation with one of the chiefs today prior to coming down here that his life would be a lot easier if he had to worry about support vehicles, ambulances, and maintaining the station and keeping his guys ready to go on fire calls, not dealing with the apparatus. And we have one company that's ready to go, and I think they've looked at the big picture and realizing that they're looking at close to $1 million to replace one ladder truck, let alone a second one, and being realistic about it. And I'll be quite honest, they were one of the first ones when the report first came out that were opposed to this. And now they're going, the city manager, Chief and Ms. Freeman, here's the titles. What are you coming for? And also they went on and made that expenditure based on how much they believe in the report and what they feel needs to be done right to purchase that squad, start to drive this another. And part of their reason for doing it was to show, hey, listen, this isn't a bad thing. This is a good thing to do. If we want to start moving this direction, we think we'll have to move this way. It's going to take some work, and I think we have to have a plan with their involvement, but I think we have to have a plan to take them, and if, A and B don't want to do it, right now, again, if they don't feel that they need to, and there's one of the stations that feels they're comfortable that they're okay for another round of apparatus replacement and purchase another engine to year X, then, you know, maybe it's, you know, those who want to come in, and I think a lot of it is, people are unsure how this is going to work, because this is something new and totally different for the city. If you think about the history, since the inception of fire companies in the city of Winchester, back in the 1700s, the companies that owned the apparatus, the companies used to pay drivers. We've had career drivers since the 20s. The companies used to pay them, and at some point, I think in the 60s, the city actually started giving the companies the money for the drivers, but the drivers actually, up until that point, were paid by the individual companies.
And once you get to the point where you have your own apparatus, you can say, this is the standard we want all the apparatus to be up to. And so the start is, we get our own and say, this is what it needs to be if you want to be part of it.
And there's a sense of accountability on our side for the insurance reasons.
It's across the board.
Yeah, so my question is, and I know this is, they want to be autonomous, and I know that I think there's a rivalry, if you will, maybe there's not, I don't know. I realize that when I work with South End. Is there any way that they can share any type of, I mean, I know that they're sharing some of these engines and some of the apparatus, et cetera, but is there any other way to share services or anything that we can, maybe they already are doing that?
We're working with them on doing different things, even though, you know, we do purchasing on the department level. We allow them to piggyback on the turnout gear or turnout gear spec. We're actually providing 3 sets of turnout gear for each station for the folks to meet the active requirements. But if they want to purchase additional hose outside of what we provide, we set them up and let them purchase. They can purchase with us, those type of things. We're working on them with some other things. The training's all been consolidated. We're trying to bring as much together as possible. And I think one of the reasons we have a program now with Friendships that has a spare, the extra engine, and that works so well as the relationship between the companies is much better. They realize that they need each other. And you know, again, when Station 4 needs an engine, Chief Lechfel's right there. If he's got 2 engines in service, Wagon 1 goes. The day of the accident with Engine 4, Wagon 1 was out there within 15 minutes after the accident in service, ready to go. Station 5's pumper's gone down for service, the same thing. But conversely, what that does to Friendship's maintenance costs is it drives their maintenance costs up, because that rig, it's 1989 or 88, 89, Wagon 1.
97.
97, excuse me, 1997. It's going to Station 5 and running as the busiest engine in the city, you know, at that age. But I think, you know, we are doing a lot of things together. They're working better together. We do things from training grounds to, you know, these guys are trying to help each other out in fundraising and stuff. But again, I think it's to the point of what can we do to help take some of the load off of them, to guarantee the services, and let them concentrate on, as I hate to say, keeping the lights on in the station, us recruiting people, putting them on the apparatus. Because again, the people they recruit helps us staff the fire ground and the EMS calls.
I mean, certainly we don't want to jeopardize the goal here, and of course what they do to serve. I mean, we don't want to jeopardize the safety of it and their pride and passion behind it.
One of my goals, Mr. Wilder, one of my goals is to keep it.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I love Winchester, Tom will tell you, I think Tom's interested, I love the tradition it's here, the history. And we have a great fire service history here, and I don't want anything to happen to that. I mean, heck, I bought I own one of Sarah's Endo pumpers myself. That's how much I believe in the history of the place. So that, everybody says you don't believe in the history, I do. I explain to my wife every time, you know, I got to pay a bill to keep it running. So, but I think that's very important. That's part of the community. And we need to do that, but I think this can help do it, because as Mr. Shand said, you go to Prince William County, even though the county's funding the apparatus and it has a compartment layout, it still has company recognition on it, and maybe the company's colors. There's a lot of places that work this, that okay, this is the base pumper, this is what we're going to provide you. If you want a bell and 6 whirly gigs on it, that's your company pride, you want to put that bell from a 1925 pumper on there, then okay, that's your responsibility to do that. But we're maintaining, and I think a lot of it is just a fear of the unknown. We've never gone down this road before. We've never gone down this road before. And the Rouse Fire Company's sitting there going, we're ready.
So are we talking about a lease by Rouse or a purchase?
What we would like to do is explore both options, and that would be coming forward as part of the proposed FY18 budget, because if we're looking at leasing in particular, you would want to go ahead and lease a new apparatus, and that takes a year to get something built. So we would explore both of those options and come up with what would be the most cost-effective for us.
104-foot man.
But I thought you said
The truck two is a 75-foot. We have a 100-foot and a 75-foot.
okay.
And they purchased the 75-foot originally for use downtown and some of the more tighter areas of the city. And they used to have a tractor drawn, which was tractor trailer ladder trucks, Benson the guy drives in the back, everybody wants Steinfeld, again, Steinfeld, the guy wants to drive in the back, yeah. They sold out because as manpower got harder and harder to keep in the station from the volunteer side and even to keep the career staff, you know, they had that guy in the back, they sold that piece and bought ladder two because of the need to have, that piece was 100 foot, they had the need to reach some of the taller buildings in the city. And really, if we were to replace the ladder truck, purchase a new aerial today, we'd buy a 100-foot plus because actually since 1998, the changes in the steering box designs, the turning radiuses of the vehicles, you can take something with a 100-foot ladder on places you can take the 75, but because of the turning radiuses and steering box designs, Tom, if you want to comment, it really, and we brought some vehicles in and tried that, and it will work. We just, make sure it's something that meets the city's needs and, can fit around the city. But that's how we got to that situation.
There was a recommendation in there for a ladder truck with 220 feet.
Ground ladder, those are ground ladders.
Those are the ground ladders.
Yes.
Portable ladders to get removed and then get put to different sides of the building in different elevations.
Right now, one of the reasons, if you look at truck two, without getting too technical, because it has all the extrication equipment on it, there's very minimal amount of ground ladders. Ladder two, we only have one 35-foot extension ladder in service in the city, and that's on ladder two. Right now, that vehicle's out of service. The longest ground ladder on truck two is a 28-foot. Is that a big issue? As Mr. Shan said, 30 years in the fire service, I can think, count on one hand how many times I've been involved in seeing ladder rescues done on ground ladders. That's more, again, safety for our folks to be able to get out of the building. Our policy is we ladder as many sides of the building as possible. Particularly, you get up in the areas on Germain, up around South End, and even downtown and on the north end, with some of the slopes and the setbacks, it's critical for us to get those extension ladders to the rear of the structure in case we have to get occupants out on our own guys. Because a lot of places in town you can't physically get that ladder truck. The guard departments, they're going up everywhere. Again, we use